This is a narrated PowerPoint for Human Body Systems 1 HO150. I am your instructor, Alice Shapiro. We will be going over an overview for the endocrine system. Here's our guy looking a little tiny bit smushed, I think, but demonstrating for you the glands of the endocrine system. The endocrine system are glands. They produce chemicals called hormones. Let's move on. The functions of the endocrine system are all of these that are listed. I don't need to read all of them to you. Very important in maintaining homeostasis, the balance of the chemical actions in the body. And notice affects just about every system in the body. In fact, affects every system in the body. And you will be looking at some of these hormones and have individually in the organ systems that you have already studied and will continue to study. The components of the endocrine system are the endocrine glands, which secrete their product directly into the bloodstream, and the chemical signals, the molecules that are released from one location and move to another location and produce a response. So the chemical signal is transmitted via the hormones in the blood, comes to its receptor organ or cell. We will see what this means in just a moment. In order for hormones to operate, there must be a receptor site on a cell where the hormone can bind. There are target tissues. These are the groups of cells that respond to specific hormones. Not all cells in our bodies respond to all hormones. This is a good thing. Hormones are specific. They bind to specific receptor sites. Here is an illustration, a general illustration of a capillary releasing a hormone, and then we could say geometry of that particular hormone is coordinated with the geometry of the receptors on the target cells, and is not coordinated, is not geometrically coordinated with a cell that is not a target cell. And again, receptors, this shows you an example of receptors and the specificity. These are showing you the various geometric shapes of the hormone and the receptor site. So you can see visually that certain hormones only bind to certain receptor sites. How does this work? Hormones are secreted by the endocrine glands into the bloodstream. They can travel, they do travel to all parts of the body. When the hormones, which kind of act as a key, bind to the receptor sites, which we can think of it as a lock, the response occurs. You can think of it as the key opening the lock. Blood levels of chemicals are controlled and regulated to achieve homeostasis. Blood glucose levels, for example, modify the secretion or affect the secretion of insulin. There are other hormones, most other hormones act in the same way, and normally there is a negative feedback system that regulates the secretion of hormones and therefore the response of the target cells. If you've forgotten what negative feedback is all about, go back to prior chapters and discussions, please. The pituitary gland is sometimes referred to as the master gland. It is controlled by the hypothalamus. You can see directly the physical location of the hypothalamus as compared to the pituitary gland, connected to the hypothalamus by a structure called the infundibulum. It is divided into two regions, the anterior and posterior, which we'll look at again later, and it secretes at least 6 hormones. Let's move on. This shows you the posterior, also called the neurohypophysis, and the anterior pituitary, also called the adenohypophysis. And look at all of the hormones that the pituitary gland itself does secrete. I apologize for this little icon appearing. I'm having trouble making it continue to go away. All right. The anterior pituitary, here are some of the hormones that it secretes. I'm not going to read this to you. Please take a look at the functions of these anterior pituitary hormones. Here are some more. And this diagram shows you how negative feedback works to regulate a typical hormone. This is thyroid stimulating hormone. Most of the hormones act in a similar way. So take a look at this as a model. So as blood levels of thyroid hormone increase, the thyroid stimulating hormone decreases. And this tells you the target tissues are almost every tissue in the body and what the functions of the thyroid hormone is. Gonadotropins, meaning the sex hormones. We'll talk more about these when we look at the reproductive systems. Prolactin, target tissues are the mammary glands and ovaries, and its function is to produce milk or to stimulate the production of milk. Now we're looking at the posterior pituitary, which is also called the neurohypophysis. It is directly stimulated by the hypothalamus to produce the antidiuretic hormone. And by the way, alcohol inhibits the production of this. So antidiuretic means you do not urinate excessively. Diuresis is excessive urination. So when you drink alcohol, you may have to urinate more frequently. A low amount of the antidiuretic hormone produces diabetes insipidus, which means that the kidneys produce large amounts of dilute urine. Let's move on. Oxytocin, target tissues are the uterus, increases uterine contractions during labor. So all of these are posterior pituitary hormones, and you can see in this diagram the relationship between the hypothalamus and the neurohypophysis or posterior pituitary. Thyroid gland is one of the largest glands. It requires iodine to function, and most tissue are target tissues for the thyroid gland. Notice its function. It is needed for growth. It regulates metabolic rates. Again, diagrammatically, we've seen a similar diagram just a moment ago. This is how this operates. Calcitonin, look at the functions and the target tissues. The parathyroid glands, here are their location, and here are their functions and target tissues. Regulate blood calcium levels, and they have a larger effect than calcitonin. If calcium is low, osteoclasts break down bone. You've looked at this when you looked at the skeletal system. Please review some of the information in the skeletal system chapters about calcitonin and the parathyroid hormones. And this is regulation of blood calcium ion levels, showing you parathyroid hormone and its function. The adrenal glands, they are located on top of the kidneys. They produce the adrenal medulla, which is the inner portion, produces epinephrine and norepinephrine. Look at their target tissues and their functions. They are part of the flight and fight response. Cortisol is also produced. Its target tissues are most tissues, and notice the functions. Androgens, also produced by the parathyroid hormones. Target tissues are again, most tissues, and notice the androgens affect some of the sexual characteristics and sex drive. The pancreas, we'll look at the pancreas again in the digestive system. The target tissues are liver, skeletal muscle, adipose tissue. This is a very important hormone and organ with response to diabetes. Here's the structure of the pancreas showing you the location of the hormone producing cells of the pancreas. Some of the abnormalities are diabetes mellitus type 1 and type 2. Type 2 diabetes, as I have mentioned and will mention again, is growing by epidemic proportions, and unfortunately in younger people. Type 2 diabetes used to be referred to as adult onset diabetes. Now It is just referred to generally as type 2 diabetes because many young people are being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Much of it is because of the increase in overweight and obesity among young people as well as old people, and it can be treated with diet, but sometimes it can turn into not really type 1 diabetes, but insulin dependent diabetes when enough of the pancreas cells are no longer able to produce their own insulin. Glucagon works in conjunction with insulin, and glucagon helps also to regulate blood glucose levels and actually will help glycogen to be broken down from the liver and to some degree muscle tissue to increase blood glucose levels. This shows you some of the actions, the homeostasis activities in regard to blood glucose regulation, and this shows you some of the actions of both of the hormones and what insulin does. I want you to take a look at both insulin and glucagon. All right, the testes, which we will look at again in the reproductive system, produce testosterone. Here are the functions. Ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone. We'll talk about those again in the reproductive systems. Thymus gland is important in the immune system. So we will be looking at that again, either in human body systems 1, not so much, but in human body systems 2, which I hope many of you will continue with. The target tissues are immune system tissues, and it does promote immune development and function, and we're not going to have time to say too much more about that in this course. The pineal gland produces melatonin, and it seems to play a role in the onset of puberty and controls circadian rhythms. That means your diurnal cycle. Light affects its function. And here is the diagram of the functioning of this hormone of melatonin. All right, so this has been an overview of the endocrine system. My primary, let's say, goal, desire for you is to learn the locations of the endocrine glands so that you can identify them on diagrams, and the basic functions, and also the involvement of the hypothalamus, the involvement of the hypothalamus with regulation of the pituitary and therefore hormones. So pay attention to all of these and have fun studying. Make sure you ask me any questions.